Hello, everyone, and welcome back to today's Training Industry Leader Talk L&D Strategy for Business Results in 2026, sponsored by Biz Library, Info Pro Learning, Lone Rock Leadership, SweetRush, and WeLearn. So I'm Liz Spate, the Events Marketing Specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Before we get started, though, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. So let's open up those chat windows and let us know where you are joining us from today. I am broadcasting here from chilly, sunny. It's like a chilly, sunny day here in Raleigh, North Carolina. So it is a pleasure to have you with us here today. I hope you guys are staying warm and are having a good new year so far. Love to see everybody all over. So while you're doing so, you can use this chat window for comments as well as questions. This session will be very interactive, so keep those chat windows open and let us know what you are thinking throughout. And once this session ends, you will have a brief survey kind of appear in your browser. Please take a moment to share your feedback on the session and our speakers. And all of our sessions are being recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us today with a link to the on-demand sessions. Now, if this is your first event with us, we would love to welcome you. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning and development professionals, and we offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D, like live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, our courses, our podcasts. We would love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us on your favorite platforms so we can continue the conversation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our first speakers of the day. A former Chief Learning Officer at Biogen, Ann Stott brings over 25 years of expertise in learning and development and more than a decade of C-suite leadership experience. And then we have a solutions architect at SweetRush. Carla Torgerson helps clients to dream up amazing performance solutions that both consider their learning needs and meet business objectives while also ensuring her clients meet their goals and look great with their uplines. So with that, ladies, take it away.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Liz. And thank you to Training Industry for having us here today as well. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. And we've done this in tech check, but just verifying you're seeing it okay.
Looks beautiful.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And as it says here, we're going to be talking about 4 critical skills that L&D leaders need to keep their seat at the table. And first of all, I'm going to just let Anne introduce herself.
Yeah, good morning or good afternoon. Well, no, it's got to be good morning, excuse me, unless you're in Europe. Good afternoon, but my name is Anne. Just a little information about myself. I have been in learning and development for over 25 years. I think it's actually closer to 30. Held a lot of senior leadership roles. I am a complete learning and development geek. I personally hit a milestone this past year and published my first book called Grit, and it's all about leadership and learning. And I just have to say that through my tenure, I've seen a lot of trends come and go. Some stuck, some didn't. But the one thing that never changed is the need for learning to be business aligned and to clearly demonstrate value. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. But first, Carla, how about giving a little background on yourself?
Amazing. Thanks, Anne. So this is me. I'm Carla Torgerson. I am a solution architect at SweetRush. And I've been, like Anne, I've been in the learning field for a long time. I started as a learning experience designer myself, an instructional designer back about 25 years ago. So over my career, I've really had lots of chances to work with stakeholders and business unit holders in increasingly strategic situations. And I'm really excited to share some of those things that I have been experiencing with you as well. So today we've got, you've gotten to know us just a little bit, but we'd like to get to know you too, because I think a webinar like this is always much more fun when we have a sense of who's here. We've been already watching the chat, seeing where everybody's from, but I've got questions for you as well. So I'm going to ask you to open up that chat pod. I've got it open as well. So does Anne. Do you think we have a seat at the table? Type into the chat. Say 1 if not yet. 2, I just got there. 3, I've been there a long time. And of course, you can add other comments if you wish, but go ahead, give us a 1, 2, or a 3.
I'm seeing a lot of variety, Carla. We've got
Yeah.
everything spanning from not yet, which that's fine. You're going to get there, to I've been there for a long time.
Awesome. And I even see somebody give us a 1.5. So kind of just getting in
Almost
there.
there.
Yeah,
Yes.
love that. Love that. So yeah, I think my point here, and part of what we wanted to do was really get a sense of who we had in this room, but also really encourage you. Those who have lots of experience and been at the table, we're going to have spots where we ask you questions. Please give us feedback as well. Let us all learn as a community and share our wisdom and expertise. And if you're newer to this stuff, you've got questions as well, ask them. There is never a bad question to ask. So, all right, I'm just gonna, we've got lots and lots of things coming in the chat. So thank you, everybody. Now I'm going to put just a little line there so we know when our next question is. Who are the people at your table? Is it in your operational unit or is it company-wide? Again, type in chat, give us a 1 or a 2. If you feel that you've got that seat at the table, is it more just in your unit, kind of that span of control that you have, or is it actually company-wide?
I'm seeing quite a few boths, what I think is wonderful to have that operational unit or your department and also company-wide.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And we do seem to sort of have a nice mix here as well. But as you said, a number of people seeing both as well. So awesome. Thank you, everybody. And I think part of why we ask this is really giving us that thought of like, you often start with having that really strong strategic focus within your department or your operational unit. And then over time, you can expand that to be company-wide as well. And so a lot of the things we'll talk about today will be a nice blend, helping you to move from one to the other as well. All right, got one more question for you. There we go. What is your background? Did you come into this role through L&D, or did you come in through the business or an operational unit? It was a 1 or a 2. Or if you've got neither, you can also give us, just tell us that, or tell us how did you land where you are? All right, we've got a lot of 1s in here. And some 2s, of course, as well.
Also a lot of academia, which I think is always a nice blend as well.
Mm-hmm. Super. And actually, we got a few more 2s near the end as well. But it sounds like we're mostly L&D folk, but we've got a good swath of folks in business, and to your point, Anne, a few higher ed as well. So thank you, everybody, for answering those questions as well. I think it gives us a sense of who our community is and enables us all to learn together better. So thank you, everybody. Excuse me. So today we're going to share a model that really helps us think about those 4 skills for strong strategic alignment. And again, whether you're really, you don't feel you've got a strong seat at the table, or all the way to having a really fantastic seat at the table, throughout the organization, all of these tips will be helpful to you. And they will, of course, help you grow and expand that experience as well as you wish. So our model has 4 parts, and we'll be diving in on each of them separately. The first one is business acumen. Do you know how your business makes money and where it makes most of its money? Number 2 is stakeholder relationships. Who are the go-to people that you're really connected to? Those people who will support your ideas and offer you really, the difficult feedback that you need to receive as well. And the third one is value proposition. How are you positioning your team and your department and learning in general as a value for the organization? And then finally is proactive focus. That's looking ahead, thinking beyond where you're at now, but where is the organization going as well? So, like I said, we're going to dive in on these. At any point, if you've got questions or comments, throw them in the chat. We'll be delighted to answer them as well. So, first one, business acumen. This is that idea that you really should know, how does your business make money? And where does it make the money that it has? So a lot of large organizations have multiple divisions, but it's really important to know which ones are the profitable ones. Where is, how is the money flowing throughout your business? And I know a lot of L&D people tend to kind of shy away from the business and the numbers, the money part, but that's what's driving the engine of the organization. And so being really thoughtful about that is really important to us. And Leonardo, I see in the chat you've asked if we'll be sharing the deck. Training Industry will share our deck afterwards as well, so you'll get a copy of these slides. So my quote here is that success starts with knowing how your company makes money and how learning fuels it. So for example, I was working with a very large client a couple of years ago, and they had it was a pharmaceutical company, and they had one of their most important drugs in their portfolio was about to lose market exclusivity. That means generics were going to come into the marketplace. And when that happens, a pharmaceutical company knows that the finances of their business will shift very dramatically and quite quickly. It depends on the drug, but anywhere from a couple of months all the way to a couple of years, but it does have a very strong impact. And so we knew, even in the L&D team, where the money was coming from, what was the most important part of this company's portfolio, and what were they going to do when those generics came onto the market? What were some of the things they planned as an organization so that we could also be very aware of where the focus of the business was and where things were going? So a few tips or practical actions that I encourage you to consider, and I'll ask for feedback on these as well, is first of all, read those shareholder reports and attend earnings calls. It's not hard to grab your company's 10K report at the end of each year. They probably also have quarterly reports as well. So just really know what the business is focused on and what they're sharing out to their own stakeholders. Next, we have speaking in that language of the business, right? It's talking about return on investment, productivity, innovation, not just training hours. And you'll get a lot of that language directly from those earnings reports and shareholder docs. Then you also want to map your learning plans to the finances of your business and the money, right? Tie your initiatives to the business drivers you're reading about and understanding from the organization. And then finally, as you're telling your story, tell it simply. Here's the challenge. This is the business impact we were expecting. And here's the value that learning was going to create. And the point here is really knowing how you're positioning that story. And again, using that language of the business. So I'm going to ask you, especially those who have some strong experience in our room, are there any other things that you do, or if you've got questions about any of these, type them in the chat. What do you think? Are there any other things you would add to this list? And Marilyn, thank you for your comment already. Yeah, exactly, right? If your VP of Finance is mentioning the earnings report, you want to know that you have read it too, right? Absolutely. Just give another moment, see if anybody has any thoughts or comments in the chat. Yeah, Melissa, that's a really good call. Formatting your presentation also to use the same language that they use really shows that you're connected. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I see somebody's talking about even understanding like their margin targets and if they're meeting those. Absolutely, absolutely. Like really understanding how the business is functioning and what stakeholders outside of L&D really care about. And Chris is talking about having actually implemented performance scorecards and things like that as well. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. All right, I'm just looking at a few others that are coming in here. Hey, Al, your comment about networking, we'll hear more about that actually from Anne in just a moment as well. Nicholas asks a really good question. And actually, Anne, I think this one is really in your wheelhouse. What happens when learning for HQ or headquarters isn't the same priority as learning in the field? And that field learning is really prioritized more than the HQ learning. And I'm assuming that that Nicholas works in HQ. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think it's really, does it help drive value in the business? Because that's the training that people are going to attend. And I think framing whatever your headquarter type of learning is, how is it driving value and having people understand that? And I think that's really the key. We'll talk a little bit about it in stakeholder management, but I do think that tying it to company goals, tying it to the business, how are you driving value is where you're going to get greater participation.
Super. And I see there's a few other questions that have come in the chat, a few ideas and comments as well. So thank you for everybody for sharing those. I'm going to keep us moving along just for sake of time. But if you've got a question that we don't end up answering, we'll make sure to answer those afterwards as well. And Anne, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Yeah. So when you think about stakeholders, and I love that I've already seen some comments about stakeholders in the chat, I want to throw out 3 scenarios to you. And I think this first scenario, we've all been there, done that if you're in learning. And that is someone comes to me and says, hey, Anne, you know what? We have a team meeting in 3 weeks, and I want you to do 1 hour facilitation on communicating effectively. And that's really, it's that transactional. You're not brought in for any kind of strategy. It's really just very reactive. And so scenario 1, I think, has happened to all of us and happens quite frequently. But the second scenario is a little bit better. So they come in and say, hey, Anne, we've got a team meeting coming up in 3 weeks. I want you to kind of look at our results that we have as far as engagement surveys, that type of stuff. We're thinking communicating effectively is probably where we want to focus on. How would you teach this? How can we help educate and get our people better? And so now all of a sudden they're coming to you more as a learning expert. They're asking for advice, design, or solving a defined problem. And so that's when you really start to bring more value because you're making sure that learning is applied to what they're trying to address. And then the third scenario, and I think this is the holy grail, this is where we all want to aspire to, is when they bring you in and say, Anne, we want you to look at all our data and tell me what would be the best effect of our learning. And it's really like they can't move forward without learning at the table. So before they make decisions, before they analyze the data, they're bringing you on board and they're bringing you early. And I can tell you when you come in early, the earlier you become in, the more value that learning can have, because the more you can shape of, what, this really isn't a learning issue. This is more of a communication issue. And so that third scenario of we can't move forward without learning at the table is critical. So why do I give these scenarios? And it's really when stakeholder management is done well, learning is pulled into conversation sooner, they're positioned as business solution, and they're more likely to move forward. When we're not brought in sooner, learning shows up late or even not at all. And I think that's a big critical piece when you think about stakeholder management. And we all know what it is. I don't know that we all do as much as we possibly can. So one of my favorite quotes about stakeholder management is the fastest path to success is knowing the decision makers, the blockers, and the champions. And, first of all, let me be clear. I'm just going to put it on the table here. If you don't know who these people are in your organization, that would be your top priority. I would definitely make sure that you understand who are the people that actually make the decisions, who are the budget owners, who can slow things down, who can kill an initiative, knowing all those different pieces, and really even more importantly, who's your advocate, who will speak up for you when you're not in the room. So I'll share I call it a cringe-worthy moment, but learn from my mistakes and don't do this yourself. So I remember when I was first in my chief learning officer role, I had to present to the CEO about what we were doing in learning. And I did the typical thing. I talked about, well, we've got these types of programs and this is what we're offering and here's how many people we're reaching. And I will remember this forever. I remember he stopped me in mid-sentence and he said, Anne, what you're sharing to me, I don't care about. That's not important to me. Tell me something that matters. So luckily I was on a Zoom, so you couldn't see my hands shaking. But I said, okay, let me give you an example then, Michelle, of what it looks like. We recently took sales training, and sales training used to take 6 weeks before we could get a sales rep out in the field. We were able to condense it to 5 weeks. And what that means is that sales rep is out 1 week earlier. And if they do 8 calls a day like they're supposed to, they're doing 40 more calls than you would have gotten from that sales rep last year. And we bring in 400 new hires a year. So that's 1,600 sales calls that we're making to physicians that we didn't do last year simply by able to make our training more effective and more efficient. And he smiled and he said, that's what I'm looking for. And so really taking that mindset of how do you translate that information to something that matters to them, gets that buy-in from the stakeholder. And I'm going to give you an exercise that you can do. It's something that I did with my team when I built out this spreadsheet. And the first thing you want to do is when you sit down with a team member or do it for yourself is go ahead and just list everybody that you know, like a senior leader in the business. So whether it's in your department or whether it's in the company, but just do that data dump. So, put those 2 things down, name and title. And then I want you to add the next column, and this is the decision level. And this is critical. So in that decision level, there are different things, like, is it a budget owner? Because that's critical. I have had so many people in my career come up and say, oh, Ann, I want to do this training event, and we start working on it, and then I find out they're not the budget owner. And then I find out the budget owner is not going to approve it. And so many things could have helped us be more effective if I know who owned the budget, or who is my advocate, who is going to speak up for learning, saying, hey, we really need to have learning at the table. Knowing that. There's also somebody I call a gatekeeper, and this is a sneaky one. This is a silent, deadly one. And this is that person that can influence the budget owner or influence the decision maker. And what happens with that is they might say, I remember when I reported to the CHRO, she would look at her right-hand person and say, Julie, what do you think about this program? And Julie could say, I just don't think it's the right time. And bam, the decision was no. So first of all, understanding who those people are. The next thing, and here's something that I haven't seen a lot of people do, and it's so critical. It's called current perceived value. And let me walk through what I mean by this. So this is really the stakeholders looking at you, seeing what kind of value do you bring. So if we look at no relationship, here the stakeholder is probably not aware of the learning function or doesn't know who to contact. They may be unsure whether learning even exists, what it does, or why it's relevant. And what happens here is no projects delivered, no engagement. They don't even think to involve learning at all. Okay, so that's level 1. Then you move up to somebody who has awareness. This is better, okay? This is where the stakeholder knows who to contact in learning. Ann's my training contact. If I need training, I'm going to reach out to her. Usually engagement, though, is reactive. It's transactional. They're coming and telling you exactly what they need. And so learning is seen as a service they access when needed. So not our best situations, not where we want our stakeholders to be. Then we go on to consultant. Now this is getting more interesting. This is getting better. So this is where the stakeholder is seeking out your learning expertise when a need arises. We need training. Let's talk to Ann about the best way to teach this. Or learning is brought in midstream. It's almost going back to like that scenario 2 that I was talking about, where you're coming in advised, designed, solving a defined problem, and learning is viewed as that expert advisor. Now, this last one, this is the Holy Grail. This is the Super Bowl. This is where you want to go. And it's that proactive partner. So what does a proactive partner look like? The stakeholder sees you as a thought partner. Learning is involved before before decisions are made, not after needs are defined. So in order to be here, they have to feel like you understand the business, the priorities, the constraints, and that you help shape solutions, not just deliver training. This is when they come into that scenario 3. We can't move forward without learning at the table. So if you have these columns, okay, so you've looked at, you know who it is, you know their decision level, you know what they do, and you've identified, okay, these are the different things. This would make you a good learning organization if you had this information. Here's how you take a good organization into a great organization. And these 2 extra columns that come down. This is where you're putting pen to paper to say, okay, where do you want to move that stakeholder mindset? How do you want to improve that perceived value score that they have for you? And this is managing it intentionally. And not only that, so not only to say, okay, I want to take somebody from no relationship to awareness, I'm going to specifically map out what I need to do in Q1 to make that happen. So these are the tactical things that I'm going to do. Because here's the reality. We're busy. We're in meetings nonstop, right? Back-to-back meetings. We are busy and crazy. And you can make that goal, I'm going to manage my stakeholders better. I really see that's important. I need to do it. But until you put pen to paper, until you really put your thoughts out there and make a tangible plan, you're not going to see that traction. So I would use this with all of my direct reports, where they would come in on a quarterly basis. I'm like, okay, tell me who's who in the zoo. We'd go through that. Tell me, pick 3. Pick 3 people that you want to move in that perceived value and tell me exactly what you're going to do it. What it does, it gets them start thinking tactically of how they're going to manage that relationship, how they're going to move forward. And then you can follow up in a quarter. Now, you may not move somebody in a quarter. Sometimes I've seen it take 18 months, especially if you're going from consultant to proactive partner. But this is one of those takeaways from this session that I hope you can go ahead and implement something like this. Set time on your calendar. If nothing else, do those first 4 columns. Be able to know who's who in the zoo, know the decision level, and even be able to say, okay, what do you think the perceived value score is? But if you can do the rest, this is where you can, in 2026, take your organization from good to great. So I know, did we get any questions on that, Carla? I'm sorry, I've been so busy talking. Anything that I can address on stakeholder management?
Yeah, I've been monitoring the chat, and I think mostly you're just getting a lot of folks agreeing and giving some nice thoughts about how they're doing the same. But one thing that really stood out to me was Heather had a comment where she talked about really asking people the problem they're trying to solve. And I think how that really relates into what you were talking about seems to me about that perceived value score, right? Like, do you have such a relationship where you can say, hey, you came to me with a training request, but can I turn that to be actually a conversation about what you're trying to achieve, how I can help you? And can I assume that would probably help to move people from like 2 to say a 3 in your model here?
Yeah, absolutely. Because then also they're like, oh, you're asking really good questions. You're talking about value. You're speaking my language. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, this person really can help me. The bottom line, that's what you want the stakeholder to be, right? I need Anne's help. That's where you want to move it to. And I know I'm watching our time too, and we've got 2 more great skills we want to build. So I know that any additional questions out there, we are going to respond to after the session as well. But let's talk about value proposition, because this ties in well with the stakeholder impact. Someone once said, Anne, why should the business invest in L&D? And there was a pause, and I'll remember this to this day. It basically said, Anne, if you can't answer that question clearly, all right, so if you can't answer that question of why should the business invest in L&D, somebody else will. And you won't like the answer, right? Because they're not the advocate for learning. So really thinking about going back to my lovely story of the CEO, right? He didn't care about number of courses and training hours. He was looking more for things as far as how is it impacting the business, whether it's increasing sales, retention, engagement. But think about those business terms, almost going back from Carla's first point of business acumen and carrying it through value proposition. This is your time to kind of sing your praises. So one of my favorite quotes is when an L&D leader, when a leader sees L&D as a growth engine, they invest. When they see it as a cost, they cut. And that's such a critical piece, right? They're looking at performance, productivity, retention. They don't care if it's an ILT, a VILT. They really want to be able to see that value. And so let's go to the next slide. And this is just kind of a practical tip and trick that I did when I first became CLO. So when I first became Chief Learning Officer, I had all company-wide training. And we had, like sales training, manufacturing training, R&D training. And every group had a different eval. Some people use a 10-point scale. Some people use a 7-point scale, a 5-point scale. And there was nothing that I could bubble up to take to the CEO or to take back to the business at any level to say, here's what we're doing across the board for learning. And so we started this, and this is just low-hanging fruit. This isn't high science, but we started doing one survey after every class. Didn't matter what class it was. You could add extra questions, but 3 easy questions that we asked. And it was simple. The first question was this training relevant to your job? Second question is, did you learn something new? And the third is, will you apply this to your job? So you think about it, was the training relevant to your job? That's telling me I've got the right people in the right class, or I don't, right, if I get negative results. Did you learn something new? Again, if someone's taking an advanced leadership program and we're teaching something that they learned earlier in their career, we need to know it because we either need to change the program or we need to recruit different participants. Will this apply to your job? It's fine to learn something new, but is it applicable to the work that you actually do? And then the reporting results, this comes across a lot better. You still want to do a deeper dive, but at least at a high level glance, I could sit down with my boss and say, here's what we did in quarter 1. 97% of the participants we had found the content relevant. So we're teaching people things that matter. 95% learned something new. So we're making sure that we're getting the right people in the right classes with the right information. And 92% expect to apply it in their job. Now, this isn't heavy, detailed stuff, but this is something you could implement today. This is a takeaway that you could put out there, and it would at least give you a grounding of how you can report very easily the impact. But I know, Carla, you've got another thought on this too, so let me pass it over to you.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I love about these questions, particularly the last one, is it is actually called a predictive question. So will you apply this on your job is actually a predictive question. And those who are a little bit of a learning geek like me, you might know, or you might not. It's kind of a lot of people don't know that within the Kirkpatrick's evaluation methodology, that at level 2, people often think it's really just about knowledge and can you measure how much people know from a class? But in fact, number 3, the predictive questions, is actually considered a level 2 evaluation as well. And it actually sort of starts leading you into level 3, right? Because will you apply this on your job is starting to get you thinking and reporting about at least an intentionality to do this on the job. So, again, it's correlates more closely with learning outcomes and ROI without having to do those big investments in ROI studies and things like that. And as Rachel's saying there in the chat, level 3 and level 4 are incredibly difficult to measure. And I think sometimes that prevents us from getting the data that would really help us, right? So if you ask predictive questions, that's kind of your middle ground between levels 2 and 3. And it allows you to really come up with some data that really helps you show the value you're creating for the organization. Yeah, so Sharon, you're asking how you could follow up with question number 3 with like a how question. Absolutely. Yeah. You know, whether that's still a level 2 or a level 3, you know, we could probably split some hairs there, but absolutely, like those are the sorts of things you want to record, so that, because that's going to show you the value you're providing, right? How will you apply this on your job? How are you going to do that? You know, will you apply it? How will you? Those sorts of questions become really valuable. And in fact, as a learning person, I also know that when people answer those how questions, they're actually committing, and they're more likely to make the behavior shift as well. So some pretty cool stuff there. I'm going to carry on and talk a little bit about proactive focus here as well. Now, the idea here is that you're not just rating for requests, right? If you're in this session today, it's probably because you like me, you don't want to see L&D as the order taker. And the tricky thing is that if we're not proactive, it puts us in a kind of a bad position, right? We will tend to be more reactive if we don't know what's coming in the field or the industry or our organization. So you want to look ahead and anticipate those needs. So for example, here the quote we have is that reactive teams fill orders, proactive teams shape the future. And as Anne and I were talking these items through for our presentation, it really made me think of an organization that I worked with several years ago. They knew that there was statistically, you know, the pundits were saying that there was going to be massive consolidation within their industry. That is to say that there was a lot of small organizations. They were likely to get bought up. The forecasts were that within 10 to 20 years, we could have 3 organizations statewide. And, you know, and the real far-reaching conclusions were that we might even have 3 organizations countrywide, that in the entire US, that none of these small players would exist anymore. And so what we were doing was we were not only aware of that, because that's the first step, but in addition, we were actually working closely with the strategy department, who was kind of our connection to the C-suite of where does our organization think they're going to go, right? How are we functioning within this changing economic landscape? And what are we wanting to do for ourselves as a business? Because when we knew where we were going, I was working in leadership development at the time. And so we were then able to create the right training to lead in the direction that we knew the organization wanted to go. So we were not being reactive. We were reaching out. We were working with the strategy team. We were connecting with those who really knew the direction of the organization. So just a few tips and ideas that we had from that is really scan the horizon, like know what the industry trends are and what are some of the gaps that might be emerging within your organization. You know, right now, Gen AI is the big thing, right? And so know how is, not just in L&D, but in your organization, how is this going to be changing? So for example, I'm working right now with a client in financial services, and generative AI is changing how people work with their financial planners, how they're working with their own personal finances. And so this organization needs to be ready. And if we know these things, we're able to be proactive. So then when you know those things, build that roadmap. Make sure that your learning initiatives are really aligned with those strategic priorities. Because you're thinking forward, you can also be kind of bold. If you've got some new ideas, you know, everybody wants to prepare the organization for the future. You want to try something a little new and different, maybe pilot something, you can probably make the case for that. And again, I actually mentioned in the first one as well about telling your story. And I think, again, it comes up for us really thinking about how you're showing that what you're doing is likely to be a proactive problem solver or enabling growth or whatever it is. You've got, again, a focus on the business, and you are showing how this work that you're doing is thinking ahead for the future. And again, I recognize that we're doing lots of training that's for an immediate need, but even if within that immediate need, you're thinking ahead to like, how does this impact us? How are we using this as we move into the future? So, oh, Nikki, you asked if we've got advice for siloed departments with conflicting priorities. I recognize that's a really tough one. For me personally, I tend to be really collaborative and consultative. So what I would do in that situation is talk with the business owners in both and try to find any commonalities. How can we find kind of the overlap in those priorities? If they are truly conflicting and completely at odds, then I think it's actually a conversation between those business units or even above them as to how do we remove those conflicts as well? Because if we're one organization, we should be moving in the same direction. So that would be my suggestion, again, from my armchair, not knowing the specifics of your situation. So then that brings us to just kind of wrapping up the model. Anne, do you want to share any other thoughts about that, the proactive focus, or do you want to wrap up for us?
No, I think you covered proactive focus perfectly. So just kind of a recap of what we talked about today. We talked about business acumen and speaking the language of the business, knowing that inside and out. We are great learning experts, but are you great as far as knowledge in the business and how it operates? And then we talked about stakeholder relationships. So stakeholder relationships, think about doing that mapping for yourself or with your team and do that intentional management and growth of your relationships. Went into value proposition. Think about those 3 quick, easy questions you could do, but how else can you do it? You guys are a lot smarter than me, but how else could you do something low hanging, easy to accomplish, and be able to get that value proposition out? And then proactive focus. I think there's so many things of looking beyond learning and looking where is the future, and being proactive is terrific. It's so important. And here's my challenge for you today. I would say pick at least one thing we talked about, just one thing, and agree to go ahead and this is what I'm going to change for 2026. In fact, let's take it a step further and put it in the chat. Is there one takeaway let's put it in writing. Let's make that commitment. Here we are, mid-January already. And tell me one thing you're like, yes, I am definitely going to take this away. Stakeholder mapping, love it. Good. I'm glad that really helped.
And I love that one too, especially how you talk about going from, good to great on the stakeholder mapping for sure. Let's do simple questions.
Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Anne.
No, someone asked if the recording is going to be shared, and I do believe it's going to be shared, and our slides will be shared as well. In addition, any questions that maybe we just didn't see come up in the chat, we will be following up with answers to those as well. Oh, I love hearing all these action items. Yay, you guys you are set for a very successful 2026. And Carla, I think you've got just a couple slides to talk about SweetRush and how amazing SweetRush can be.
Yeah, sure. We're going to wrap up here. And again, thank you everyone for the comments in the chat. I've been just delighted seeing those commitments like you have, Anne,
yes.
And really thinking about how you're going to take this forward. This is hopefully more than just a webinar, and actually a springboard for your own growth in 2026. So just really briefly, we are SweetRush. For those of us who don't know about us, SweetRush has been in business since 2001. So we've been a pretty important player in the L&D space for about 25 years. And we are known for a couple of big things, and they're there on the lower left of your screen. The first is our strategic consulting. And as you can see from our conversations today, this is the kind of stuff we love and that we live and breathe. And we have numerous consultants who help our clients really think strategically and help with their business needs. We also are really well known for our custom learning work. That's design and development of high impact performance changing materials and learning materials, e-learning, instructor-led training, things like that. And then we also have a division for talent solutions or talent placement, really helping our clients by placing staff, great instructional professionals on their team. And we also have our XR team, which does our emerging tech work. And I have to say, I know I am biased, but I just think the Gen AI work coming out of that team is impressive. I am delighted to get to even be in the room with those guys when I get to hear them speak. So, and we sometimes actually do webinars with training industry about some of the Gen AI work we're doing as well. So if you're interested, you can always tune in for those as well. And yeah, that's a little bit about us. We've clearly won a number of awards for our work as well. And overall, this is us. This is Anne and myself. We've given our email addresses here. You can scan those QR codes to get to know us a little bit better as well. Connect with us on LinkedIn. We can become friends on LinkedIn, and we can keep in touch there as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today. If you have questions, feel free to add them to the chat. We will follow up with everybody with answers to questions as well. And thank you again for being here. I really appreciate you taking time out of what's probably a very busy day.
And please reach out to us on LinkedIn. Really would love to connect you. QR codes are easy to use. And thank you so much for your time. And Liz, we will hand it back to you.
Thank you, ladies. No, I totally agree with the chat. There was so much woman power in the chat, as well as I think Geraldine was like, "Are you guys hiring?" And that cracked me up. So you guys were such a hoot to this event. Thank you so much, and I appreciate for y'all's time today. So with that though, this was just the first session, y'all. We have a complete jam-pack for other sessions, so I can't wait to see you all there. So we will be taking about a 15 to 14 minute break. Up next, we do have Russ Hill for their session sponsored by Lone Rock Leadership. Complexity doesn't scale, how L&D can help managers get results. So it's going to be a great session. So in just a moment, I'm going to end this session. You can join our next session by returning to that event lobby and going to that session tab. So I hope you will stick around for our next session, which will begin at the top of the hour. I will see you all there. Bye, everybody.